today is a perfect day to get some odd jobs done on the car. I have been putting them off because I've been just doing other stuff. I've had work, things like that. And then I'm still waiting on some parts to arrive from 7 Mini Parts. They got delayed because of the snow here, you know, in North Carolina, and really like southern North Carolina and South Carolina. People just lose their minds over the snow. So they have been delayed. I've got some of them, but can't continue that video, so perfect time to get some small stuff done on the Mini. So first things first, let's tackle the back of the car. I'm going to say that when I initially put the springs in, things have kind of settled and I need to adjust it up a little bit, but in reality, I probably just didn't set it high enough from the beginning. So let's jack the car up in the back here and we'll adjust those high-lows up a little bit so that the car sits a little higher. Been scraping speed bumps and it's been a pain. Now, I'm not wild about this job, if I'm being honest. It's kind of annoying getting in there to adjust those springs on the back there is really tight and really hard to get to, but just got to get back here and do it. Now, one thing too that I can genuinely never remember is one, what size these are. I always end up having to test like 3 of these to get it right. Of course, while I'm talking about it, I get it on the first try. Awesome. But the other thing is that I can never remember what size the high-low spring adjuster is. So once we get this off, we can take a look at it and figure out how big that is. Now, one thing that I had forgotten, or at least chosen to forget, is how hard it is to get a camera back here to show you guys exactly what I'm working on. But I think you can see pretty good. Here is my red coil spring with the trumpet, and then my adjustment screw right here, and then this is the locking nut that goes on here to keep this from moving. I put some anti-seize on here. I'm probably going to be really happy that I did that, so thanks, Past Cole. But the idea here is that I'm going to take this threaded section, whoops, my other hand was blocking that, but I'm going to take this threaded section right here and loosen it. And by loosening it, it's actually going to push the trumpet and this whole assembly out. It's going to make it longer and therefore make the car sit higher. I don't need to do a whole bunch, but I do want to bring it out a little bit. So we're going to see if I can do this without any special tools or anything. Ideally, I would have been able to reach in from the back there, but I put my exhaust in because a car needs an exhaust, and I can't do it from that angle anymore. So let's see what I can do. Man, I'm so glad that I put anti-seize on this thing because this would have been basically impossible without it. Alright, so now that we have that loosened, we just need to run up the threaded section, and the base of it right down at the bottom here, which you can barely see in the video, is an area that is flat that's made for adjustable wrenches or fixed size wrenches. So I'm going to try this adjustable first, and then if this doesn't work, then I'm going to go grab one that is specifically the size I need. But hopefully this will fit. Well, I can get it one tiny little screw turn, but I'm going to need a smaller wrench, something that's not quite so big here, that I can get in there and get this to work more properly. It says on here 3/4 inch, so that means it's 3/4 inch. I'll be right back. And I'm back with 2 3/4 inch wrenches. For whatever reason, I've got a bunch of 3/4 wrenches. I've got a bunch of repeat wrenches. I probably really need to go through all of my tools and figure out what I still need. But look at that. That's great. That fits in there just perfectly. So I'm just going to run this up a little bit. I'm not going to run it up a bunch. There we go. It's probably good. Can bring this back in. Still got that anti-seize on it. Thanks, Past Cole. And we can go ahead and tighten that sucker up. Alright, that's tight. So, let's put the wheel back on. I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side. And I'm just going to lift it up a little bit. Just a few of these threads, just a little bit of adjustment creates quite a lot of lift on this car, just with all of the articulating angles and everything here. One other thing is that while I'm in here, I think I'm going to go ahead and clean up the inside of this space because it is really, really gross. It's been kind of dirty here, and the other day I got stuck behind a salt truck, of course, in the Mini. At least I wasn't driving a car that was prone to rust. But anyway, can rinse this out. I might actually just bring this to the car wash after this and get it all cleaned up. It's probably going to be easier. So, let's get to the other side. That's interesting. This should not be spinning. I wonder if either the parking brake is not set on this one, or it needs to be adjusted a little bit. Probably needs to be adjusted. Yeah, so I just pulled my parking brake up one notch, and I can tell it's a little bit tighter. So we're gonna need to adjust the brake on this too. The back plate has a little adjustment screw. So it's good that I'm back here, I can adjust it while it's up. However, that does mean that I can't get this wheel off easily, so I gotta lower it back down, loosen the nuts, and then lift it back up. Now, one thing you probably noticed if you're paying attention is that this has a spacer on it, where the other side actually has a drum with the spacer built into it. I actually got those drums that have the spacer built in, and I'm not wild about them. I thought they would be a lot better here, but it ended up not working quite the way I wanted it to. So I ended up moving back to this spacer on this side, but I ran out of time the day that I was working on it, and then I never went back and changed that drum, which I guess would be a good thing to change on this Odd Jobs episode. So I might do that. We'll see. I might just be lazy still. We'll see. And now this is one of those things that's really trial and error. So as you adjust this out and you get the car taller, you know, you could set this back down, and then the other side is a little smaller or a little bit bigger, and then you get to adjust it some more. So it's not one of those things that's a perfect science, in the sense that it requires some tweaking. Alright, so now it's time to get to the back of this back plate and tweak that parking brake adjuster a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to give you a view from my phone because it's going to be a little bit easier. So you should be able to see the parking brake adjuster. It is this little square screw right on the back of this back plate right here. This gets tweaked one way or the other to loosen or tighten the parking brake's setting on your drum here. The way I've been doing it, and the way that's been successful for me, is I have my parking brake pulled right now in a situation where this should stop it most of the time, but it doesn't. And I come back here and adjust this, see if this will spin. If it still does, adjust it some more, so on and so forth. So let's do that. Alright, so this is one of the situations where, I was going to say this is one of those situations where I can never remember which size wrench I need, but of course, like this video has already shown you, if I'm talking about it, I will be getting the right one on the first try. And in this case, 11/32 is what we're using. Ridiculous standard measurements. Ooh, that's much tighter. That's great. There we go. It's getting real tough to turn that now. That's exactly what we want when the parking brake is engaged. Now, mind you, this does have these notches in it, so you'll start to spin it, it'll get really tight, and then it'll loosen up again. So keep that in mind. There we go. Just a little bit more. So now the only other thing that you want to test when you're doing something like this is that the wheel spins freely when the parking brake is not engaged. So let's go disengage the parking brake, and then we'll spin this again to test it. So right now, it's disengaged, the wheel should spin. Just like that. No resistance. Awesome. Now, there are some situations where when you reattach your wheel, this actually gets pushed down, sandwiched in there, and then it does end up engaging while you're driving. And so in that scenario, you're just going to want to loosen it back off and then loosen this on the back a little bit. And I have a sneaky suspicion that I over-tightened it a little bit, just because I've done this a few times. And so I'm going to loosen it just a hair, and that should do it. So it's free right now. When I put the wheel on, it should remain free right now. Now you can usually test this by just putting 2 of these nuts on. That'll sandwich it down and allow you to test to make sure that the parking brake engages and remains disengaged when it's not turned on, or when it's not pulled. I'm only hearing a tiny little bit of scraping. That could get annoying, so I'm going to loosen it just a smidge. I might be able to reach behind here and get it with the wheel on. Alright, great. So now my parking brake is engaged here, and this is tight. So I'm going to go ahead and set these on here, lower this down, check the height I just adjusted, and then we should be ready to roll into our next job. Alright, so now that we've got the suspension adjusted up a little bit, we've got that kind of sorted out. The next thing I want to do is gap my rocker assembly. I have been chasing some kind of clatter in here for a while, and I'm close to positive that it is the rocker assembly. So I'm going to take the cylinder head off again, and we are going to take a look at that rocker assembly and see if we can figure out if it's gapped properly. I think that I might have gapped it incorrectly when I put my camshaft in a while back. I thought that it had to be gapped to the stock gapping, but I learned a couple days ago that wasn't the case. I have a mini sport camshaft in here, and I called them and they told me that it actually needs to be 16th thou, not the 12 or 13th thou, whatever it is the stock setting is. So to do that, I just need to take this rocker cover off, and then I'm going to take my spark plugs out. I'm going to disconnect all of these ancillary items, and then I will show you guys how to gap this stuff. Now, a little while ago, I actually did a video on how to gap these things properly. The motor was out of the car at the time. And then on another channel that I watch called Stevenston Motor Company, they did a really incredible job explaining how to gap this rocker assembly up here. So if you haven't seen those yet, I would check out his video. It's up in the corner of this video somewhere. It should be popping up. But they have a great explanation on how to do it, and the guys over there are really knowledgeable. Their channel is also really cool, so if you haven't seen it before, I definitely recommend going to check that out. They actually went to Japan and got some pretty cool stuff in the past, and it's definitely worth looking at. Now, if you're careful doing a job like this, you actually can save the head gasket that's on here. Especially if you used like some gasket sealer fluid. There we go. And that came off pretty nicely. I think that I am going to be able to save that gasket. So looking at this oil up here, it looks okay, except over here it's kind of like kind of foggy, and I'm wondering if it's coming from these breather hoses, because the oil that was coming through these in the past was kind of milky looking. And I genuinely, I'm not sure if that's normal or not. So maybe you guys can tell me whether or not that's normal, because the rest of the oil looks perfect. I mean, it's the right color. As far as I can tell, it's fine. But generally, milky oil means something like coolant is mixing in with this. But I'm not seeing it in the rest of this, so I'm not quite sure about all that. Anyway, so I've got a lot of this hosing up here. Let's see if I can kind of push it out of the way. Show you guys this stuff a little bit better. So you can see your spring and valve system here, and you can see the spring is depressed here, here, and then other ones are all the way up. Those are the valves that open and close, let air in and out of your motor, and the push rods control that in the back of the motor here. So what we're doing when we're gapping this is creating space, the proper amount of space in between the spring and the actual lifter here. So let me get my feeler gauge, and I'm going to take these spark plugs out, and to adjust where the springs are, you actually have to move the car back and forth. I find that to be the easiest way to do this when the motor is in the car. If it's out, you can actually just turn the motor over manually. But let's get these out. Now you may be curious why I took the spark plugs out, and the reason I do that is to remove the compression in the cylinders. When the car is moving back and forth when it's in gear, if you have the spark plugs in there, you are effectively creating the compression that you need to run the motor. Well, not quite, that's a lot less compression, but you are still fighting the compression of the motor in order to get these to run and spin. So now, we should, with the parking brake off, we should be able to push the car, and you can watch these springs move up and down. there we go. You can see the springs are moving when I'm pushing the car, and that is going to allow me to get in here and gap these properly. Now whenever I do a technical job like this, I almost always have my Haynes manual. Even though I've done this a million times, I still like to have my Haynes manual with me just in case, to make sure I'm doing this the right way. But in the video that I was talking about, they actually go into the rule of nines. So the concept behind that is that you are always going to adjust the valve opposite to the one that is fully compressed that will allow you to add up to 9. So that was kind of a confusing way to explain it, but the idea is that when you have a valve fully compressed, like this one's almost fully compressed. This is the 7th valve. So in order to add up to 9, you're going to be adjusting valve number 2. So 7 plus 2 equals 9. And so on and so forth throughout the valves. But if you don't like doing math, or you're bad at math, or whatever, you can always use the Haynes manual reference here too. So if valve number 8 is the farthest away from the radiator, remember this is the front of the motor, this is the back, valve number 8, valve number 1. But I'm going to get it to where we have valve number 8 fully compressed, and then I'll start with valve number 1, because I usually like to start at the top of this list, make sure I go through every one of them, and I don't forget. It's the middle of a time lapse. You guys know what that means. It's customer showcase time. Alright, so today's customer showcase is a little bit different from the ones that we've done in the past, and the reason it's different is because the car I'm featuring on this episode is probably one of my favorite cars, and most definitely one of my most favorite people who I follow on Instagram. And I'm pretty sure it's not just the car that I love so much, but it's actually because this guy lives in Italy, he lives in Milan, and he has a beautiful green Mini that he takes on drives to Lake Como almost every weekend, or at least from my Instagram viewer perspective, it looks like it's every weekend. This guy is living the life. It's amazing. I love the whole persona he's got going on Instagram, and I have to be honest, I've got kind of a mini lifestyle crush on this guy. So a couple of you probably know this already if you are friends with me on Facebook, but I am actually in the process of getting my Italian citizenship, which I'm really excited about. I've almost got all my documents together to get that finalized and filed, but seeing this guy and seeing him drive his Mini all over Italy is just like one of the coolest things. It's exactly what I want to be doing with my Mini, and granted, I have the Great Smoky Mountains near me and it's incredible up there. The roads are wonderful, but there's something that just calls to me about the small Italian roads and driving in front of this beautiful lake, and it's out of this world. But you guys have already started to see the amazing photographs that Lodovico sent me from his Instagram and his personal stash of awesome, beautiful photos. Now, I really dig the rally lights on the front of this Mini. The color is wonderful. It's actually one of the colors that I thought about going with before I ended up choosing the blue on my Mini. And then this Mini is obviously taken care of. I have seen lots of Instagram stories of him tinkering on the car and just keeping it running and keeping it on the road, which I love. If you guys want some amazing Mini content, check out his Instagram. It should be popping up somewhere on the screen. And Lodovico, thank you so much for sending me these photos. I am really looking forward to continuing to follow you on Instagram. And with that, let's get back to the Odd Jobs episode. Alrighty, so now all of these are gapped properly. I can return my valve cover to this, to the head, And you'll just want to double check the gasket, make sure that everything's stuck on there still, and it's going to make a good seal. And in my case, it still is. All right, so I took my breather off here because I wanted to see kind of why something in there might be turning a little milky. Got some like buildup on here, and it's definitely fluidy, like water, which is kind of concerning to me. But I'm gonna take this breather off because it is kind of concerning. I don't really know why this is appearing this way, and I'm probably going to remove this breather going into my valve cover because I don't want moisture going into the valve cover and mixing with the oil. That's bad news bears. So let's see what's in here. Alright, so sorry for the jump cut, but you may notice I have an old valve cover here and then a valve cover gasket. This is the one that was already on the car. That chunky white stuff that's coming out of my breather hose is making me really uneasy. So I don't want to keep introducing that into the valve cover here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put this old valve cover on that's perfectly sealed. Press that down on there. Oops, I put that on the wrong way. Now obviously this isn't pretty, but this is my backup valve cover in the event that there is a situation like there is right now. So I'm going to go ahead and screw this sucker back on, and then I'm going to run these PCV hoses back the way that they were. It's just something about that chunky moisture is just making me really uneasy. So it's always to be better safe than sorry. The strange thing is that this moisture, it doesn't smell like coolant, it just smells like oil. So it makes me wonder if there's like condensation happening or something inside this whole breather system, which might be possible if the breather system was not fully sealed. And I'm really hoping that's what it is, because I don't want there to be a coolant leak in my motor, because that would be the worst. Now what I'm doing by reconnecting everything the way it was before, I'm setting up this PCV valve so that it is a closed system again. Previously I was running the exhaust gas into my valve cover and then out of the valve cover and into the PCV valve. And I'm wondering if there's some moisture getting introduced somewhere in that system. If it's open to the air outside, it's going to introduce some moisture. So I'm hoping reconnect everything here, and then we'll see how it goes. If it's being sucked into the intake, I'm not too worried about moisture getting in there, because then it's just sucked into the pistons and then exploded again, burns off that moisture. But if it's in the oil, then it's mixing with the oil and reducing the oil's viscosity, and then it can cause to engine failures. So definitely do not want that. Now, some of you who have a Mini probably might be thinking this is like crazy town, all the stuff that I'm doing here in order to run this PCV valve. You could be asking, why don't you just nix the PCV valve entirely and run it without it? And the reason I don't do that is because this car is extremely fumy. But since I do drive it on the regular, I like to actually not smell like a car when I arrive places. And this is one of the best ways that I can accomplish that, is to actually run the PCV valve. Well, that's a hilarious amount of hoses, all to get it out of the valve cover. But here we are. Whoops, forgot a hose clamp. Alright, so now I have a hose clamp on everything. It's kind of ridiculous, but it'll have to do for now. Just ride with it and see how it works. One other thing I've been noticing is that I've been having some kind of like stuttering, and I haven't pinpointed the source of the problem yet. Now the things that I've checked so far is, one, to make sure that all of my spark plugs are getting spark, check. I have taken out my distributor cap and made sure that it is clean. The leads on the inside of the distributor cap often get dirty. You can scrape them off, and they'll kind of build up corrosion over time. So if you scrape those off, you tend to get a better signal firing to your motor. And then all of my leads are working properly as well. So the next thing that I want to check is my fuel line, and specifically my fuel filter. As I was going through all of these problems that I was having, it dawned on me that I don't think I've ever changed the fuel filter since I put it in back in, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And so I'm going to take that. First, I'm going to create a better bend on this hose right here because I think it can get kind of pinched. So it might not be getting fuel to everything equally. Now I've got these cool pinchers here that I think will be pretty helpful. And they just pinch whatever line you're working on. And then you bring up the little locker and lock it shut. And in theory, that should create a seal there. We'll see. If I get fuel everywhere, we'll know that it didn't work. Now that there is a much better looking bend. It doesn't pinch at all. And this will be much better. Hopefully, will deliver better fuel to my carburetors. More consistent fuel at least. I'm going to bring this for a zip around the road. And I would bring you guys along with me, but this microphone that I have over here that you guys actually can't see in that video, it does not work very well in the car. So I'm going to zip around, I'll be back, and then I'll report back and let you guys know how it runs. Alright guys, so I am so excited. I'm so excited because those things we just did on the Mini fixed my ignition problem, fixed my valve timing, my chatter problem. Holy crap, the car drives so much better. It's so much better. I don't know why I've been putting these things off. I guess it's just because it's cold. I guess I could say that. Honestly, I was just being lazy. But fixed the valve chatter. The car now fires at the right time. I'm not getting misfires anymore. I do have to kind of like tweak and tune the air-fuel mixture a little bit more before it gets to kind of the perfect blend of air and fuel. And I've actually got a few questions about that from you guys, about how to properly read the AEM fuel mixture ratio, as well as how to kind of determine that yourself on your car. So that video, I will probably do one by itself because it'll actually take me a little bit of time to go over all of the kind of tuning the mixture and making sure it's right. And it's a little bit different on different carbs, but the concept is still the same. And it really deserves its own episode rather than one of these kind of knick-knacky job episodes that I do, the odd jobs. But that's it for Classic Mini DIY today. I didn't have a ton of big odd jobs to cover on this video, but I do have a lot of other stuff I have to do to the Mini, so don't worry, these episodes are not ending anytime soon. But until the next episode, motor on!